Hello, I'm Chelsea Hanson. I'm a grief educator, and my purpose is to help people go on after a loss to live a meaningful and fulfilling life in memory of those they love. Today I would like to share with you one of my favorite principles for healing grief. And I actually will give you the step-by-step process so you can go through it every day as well to release grief and hold on to the love and not the loss. But first, let me tell you a little bit about my story. Imagine you had just lost your father and you're only 4 years old. Later, imagine in young adulthood, you lose your mother and you don't have any living relatives and really no existing family. So imagine you feel alone and not sure where to turn. This is my story, and that is what happened to me. So during my mom's funeral, during that experience, I felt like my world had stopped, but the world around me kept moving. And then shortly after the funeral, people began asking, "Isn't it time you move on? Shouldn't you be over this by now?" So as you can imagine, those comments were very upsetting. I'm sure you can relate if you've lost someone yourself. So first, comments like that simply show a misconception in society that there's a certain amount of time that is acceptable to grieve. And it also shows people's discomfort with the grieving process. People want to help you, but they simply don't know how. The mourner is encouraged to move on and really discontinue the ties with their loved one. And I wondered, how could I go on and forget about someone I love, someone who was so important in my life? But this was the message that society was giving. And I thought, well, why should I follow this message? In fact, later I learned, according to the continuing bonds model of grief, staying connected to the deceased is very helpful in the grieving process. In fact, you hold the loved one close to you while you're mourning and embarking on a new life. I intuitively knew the deceased person was still with you, maybe not physically, but in a new and different way in the spiritual realm. The relationship was not dead, it would just needs to be reaffirmed and reworked in a new way. After a few years, the heavy pain or heavy fog of grief had lifted. So I started to embark on a new normal. And it was interesting because then when this fog was gone, I started to feel my mom's presence around me. For example, I would hear, or I'd have a conversation with someone and they would tell me something that my mom would have said. Or I overhear a conversation and it had just the words I needed to hear. And I would even have messages popping out to me from like billboards and license plates. So as you can imagine, it felt kind of strange. I was hoping it was my mom. I wasn't sure if it was my mom, and I certainly wasn't going to tell anyone for the risk of being thought to be crazy. And then after that, a few years later, I had a changing point. About 10 years after my mom had died, I had the opportunity to go to a session called angel therapy. And I didn't know exactly what it was, but I learned basically it was a spiritual reading similar to what you would see on John Edward Crossing Over, or the now popular Long Island Medium. So during this session, Trish, the practitioner, had asked me who died of a heart attack. And I said, well, my dad. So I was a little skeptical, but then she went on to tell me exactly what my dad looked like, things there was no way that she could ever know, things only I knew. This was over 40 years ago, so there certainly weren't any pictures of my dad floating around on the internet. And then she went on to do the same thing about my mom. So it was just astonishing. This opened a whole new level of healing for me, but it also reaffirmed and validated what I already knew. My mom was there, my dad was there, their spiritual presence was there. So it was just this piece of validation that I needed. So that's what I wanted to encourage you today to think about. Have you ever sensed or felt the feeling of your loved one? Have you ever seen any signs near you? And what I mean for a sign, it can be something very simple. A cardinal pecking on your windowsill, a butterfly following you, a message you hear on the radio, scent of perfume or tobacco. And if you felt any of these signs, or maybe you haven't felt any of these signs, but I encourage you not to disregard any little things you're picking up on, because it can be the spiritual world trying to connect with you. So just keep an open mind and start noticing what is around you. And at times when you feel relaxed and calm, that is most likely when you're going to feel this presence. So I just wanted to show you today a few ways to do that. And first is to facilitate the connection. I go into my spiritual sanctuary, let's say, a place in your house where it's quiet, you're not interrupted, and I bring in a picture of my mom, so you can bring in a picture of your loved one, and there you can just send a message to your loved one. You can say, Mom, I hope you're getting this message. I know you're receiving it. I know you're feeling it. And I know you're sending the same back to me. So every day I encourage you to try to do this. How can you continue the bonds with your loved one?